Welcome. I'm Shravan Goli, Chief Product Officer here at Coursera. We're back today with another installment of this ongoing series where I'm joined by leaders across business, education, and government to explore topics at the intersection of learning, technology, and innovation. Today, I'm excited as I'm joined by my dear friend, Matthew Rascoff, Vice Provost for Digital Education at Stanford University. Matthew has wide experience across education and has championed the industry from many angles, including positions at a startup incubator for edtech companies, leading various product management teams, launching JSTOR's first international office in Berlin, and as an educator and administrator at universities, including the University of North Carolina, Duke University, and now Stanford. So Matthew, thank you for joining us today. I'd like to start by asking, what drew you to pursue a career in the digital education space?
First of all, thank you so much, Shravan, for having me as part of this series. I'm really excited to engage with you and with the LinkedIn Live audience today. I would say, think back to some of the great learning experiences that you have had, and maybe those in the audience can do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And don't you wish that others could have participated in those electric moments in a classroom when the energy was just intoxicating? I don't think that feeling is accidental. I actually think it's constitutive of great learning experiences that we want to share them with others. Humans are social beings, and yes, learning is the most social thing perhaps that we do as human beings.
Yes.
And so to me, the appeal of digital education is the opportunity to democratize great learning experiences like that and make them more widely available. And I think it just fulfills, at least for me, that basic human need to share those incredible learning experiences that I have had, and I wish many others could too.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think as you think about it, we all know we have had the fortune of great education, and we really, really desire equity and access to education. Education should be a fundamental right and not a privilege. I totally agree, Matthew. And that leads us to our topic today, which is actually how can innovation improve equity and access to the education? So let's start with a baseline for the audience. Like, what are you talking about when we say innovation in education?
Thank you. I mean, let's start with maybe a formal definition, and then maybe we can riff on it a little bit together. So I like the definition from the management theorist Peter Drucker, who wrote in his book, Landmarks of Tomorrow, that innovation is purposeful change by means of the scientific method. So it's basically an application of the scientific method of control and experimental groups to organizations and to business and to the human challenges.
Yes.
I think that's right, but it's not entirely sufficient. Yes. And I would add to that definition that innovation is also a mindset, and that it's a methodology as well as a mindset. And I think it's rooted in a belief that change is possible,
yes,
that an understanding that great institutions and organizations are the products of historical evolution, right, and therefore they need to evolve in order to maintain their vitality for the future. So I think there's a basic optimism that is maybe missing from the formal definition. That's the mindset as well as the methodology, as I view it.
I love the way you said it. It's a mindset. I mean, clearly you got to challenge the status quo.
Exactly.
And that's where I think, I would say, the desperation leads to innovative moments. And today, the desperation is that there are millions of people around the world that do not have access to high quality education. And when we know that there are real opportunities out in the world where they could be participating in general, right? And so could you give our audience an overview of what you see as the main barriers as a result to creating this equity and access in education today?
So I would categorize them into 4 high-level areas, and maybe we can dig into these a little bit deeper. So first is the digital divide, which is, and none of these are probably going to be a surprise, but I'm going to try to add a little bit of detail, maybe just from my experience. the digital divide became more salient during the pandemic. And one lesson from the K-12 sector in the pandemic was that many school districts didn't even have the data to understand the scope of the problem. Many of them knew whether there was a device in the home or not. But when parents were trying to work remotely, one device wasn't actually sufficient for students to do remote school. And so they couldn't even get a grasp on the scope of the problem and the magnitude of the problem because they had framed the question too narrowly in the past. To me, the digital divide it's gotten better on some dimensions. There's obviously much better connectivity, but it is not a solved problem, certainly not for using technology in creative ways rather than just consumption ways. A mobile device is not enough to do programming on. And so, even with a fast connection on a mobile device, the digital divide is still there if you want to support a creative mindset among learners. Number two, I would say, is academic preparation and just access to knowledge. Only half of schools in the US offer AP Calculus, which is itself the most widely offered AP class. And I just think if we accept that as the status quo, how can you possibly hope to support opportunities in science and technology for the next generation? Like, that's just unacceptable to my mind. The third category I would say is financial access, another well-known problem. But the fresh wrinkle I would add on this is that Congress is currently debating whether to expand the Pell program, which is, it supports higher education access for low-income students in the US. They're considering whether to include short courses like Coursera type, specializations on Coursera, but they're excluding online programs, which to me is so short-sighted. So to me, online has been one of the great bright spots in expanding access to skills for social mobility. But to me, Congress is making a mistake by leaving this very powerful, engine of social mobility out of the Pell expansion effort. And the last thing I would say, and this might be a little bit newer for your audience, is about networks and social access and community. So the economist Raj Chetty did this analysis that matched performance in STEM courses in K-12 with future patenting by people who came out of the school system. So who was a high performer in school who went on to become a patent holding inventor. And what he found was that just doing well in math and science courses was not enough. You also needed access to networks of other inventors if you were going to become an inventor yourself. And one thing he found is that people who lacked that access would go on to produce many fewer patents, even if they had been very high performers in math and science in school. And the access to those networks was really, there are deep equity problems in that. Low-income and minority students, even if they were very high performers in school, generally did not tap into those networks and could not become the future inventors. So those are my four high-level categories of the equity problem and the scope of the magnitude of the issue, at least in the US.
That's great. I mean, Matthew, I think it resonates with me a lot when I think about digital divide, devices and connectivity. But you also said, it's not just about mobile access, but there's also being able to do coding. It's how do you enable that? From a Coursera standpoint, I think we've realized the similar issues. And last year we launched low data downloads via the mobile app. So any lecture, any video, any course could be consumed in an offline way. And we recognize, especially, US, obviously populations within US, there are lots of communities that don't have access, the high-speed connectivity access. But as you expand and get a global view, the challenge gets really, really bad in lots of different countries. And so we recognize that. And that has kind of really helped a lot of learners that are looking to gain those skills and credentials for those future jobs, access to that. The Coursera labs with guided projects and other things, which can be fully executed and delivered through the browser, which is, I think, another important aspect to your point, which is the online. To be able to deliver through a browser is the most simplistic way that you can reach sort of the broader population. I'm with you on this exclusion of online programs. I mean, just because we, I think there's a lot of innovation that has happened across the education technology space in the last, prior to pandemic, but I think I would say accelerated even more post-pandemic. And we're living in a world, it is going to be hybrid, and hybrid is a way that I think we need to continue to evolve.
Exactly.
And so I hope somebody in Congress
Maybe they're
hears
listening
you today, and they're listening, and they get this idea to kind of at least kind of rethink what they're doing right now. Moving on to the next topic for me. So then, just as you set this up across these 4 dimensions. So what are the most impactful innovations in education you've seen recently that have led to an increase in equity and access? And how do you think you can actually replicate this across different institutions, geographies, and audiences?
So let me answer that by starting with a story that has inspired some of my thinking. And it's actually a global story. You talked about kind of global access. So not that long ago, in an elementary school in Germany, a teacher decided that a Turkish immigrant boy should be tracked into the vocational school rather than to go to the gymnasium, which is the university prep program in Germany. His neighbor, who was a native German, stepped in and intervened and said, this boy belongs in the gymnasium. And he ended up becoming the first Turkish immigrant student to attend the gymnasium in Cologne in Germany.
Wow.
His name was Uğur Şahin. And if he had not gone to the University of Cologne, he probably would not have co-invented the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for COVID-19, which has saved millions of lives around the world. So to me, like for underrepresented minority students, low-income, first-gen rural students in the US, like the only exceptional part of that story about Uğur Şahin is that it has a happy ending, because in the US, the majority of the highest achieving low-income students in schools never go or even apply to selective colleges. They would admit them and they would give them generous financial aid, but they're never even on the radar. And this is the problem of undermatching. That means that we miss out on some of these standout students, the next generation of Uğur Şahin. So to me, like identifying and supporting talent is not only important for fairness of our education system. To me, it's also about the foundation for human progress. Like academic talent identification and development right now is such a haphazard process. It's so subject to bias and racism and discrimination. I worry that the meritocracy in the United States is just, it's not functioning as it could be and should be. And so what we're working on this, and we're intensely interested in this problem at Stanford. And we've designed a program which is a collaboration with the K-12 system that allows talented low-income students in Title I schools across the US to start taking courses for credit from Stanford while they're still in high school. It's a dual enrollment model, and it's oriented towards helping those students not just build up the knowledge and skills while they're still in high school, but also the confidence and the identity that they belong at a place like Stanford, that they could come here or to another selective college too. It's not just about our pipeline. So to me, like that is really a critical issue that higher education needs to play a more significant role in solving these upstream equity challenges in the pathway to college. Yeah, totally. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you know, earlier you had talked to me a few days ago about code in place. I thought it was fascinating idea when you can bring in, what was it, like 10,000 students or 20,000 students from around the globe? Yeah, so Code in Place was part of the inspiration actually for doing this high school project. And it's a co-teaching model. So to the best of our knowledge, this was the course that had the greatest number of teachers involved in history. So 12,000 students taught by 1,200 co-teachers, each of whom ran a weekly live discussion section that brought an active learning approach into this highly distributed global experience. And machine learning working in the background to give feedback to those instructors on how to improve their performance in facilitating a good active learning session. And we now have research that shows that the teachers were able to improve student contributions by 24% using a randomized controlled trial on the basis of that machine learning driven feedback. So to me, this is like a learning design that brings in the technology and people in a new configuration and in new ways. And that to me has enormous potential for how we think about the expansion of quality education, maybe not on the scale of millions, but at least for now on the scale of 10,000, which is a very significant expansion of what we do. So
yeah, I mean, you got to start somewhere. But I think what you're brought up some key interesting points there for me. I think one is technology enables scale, right? So you talked about machine learning, AI-driven feedback system that gives, the sort of the personal touch for the individual learner. I think that's fantastic. The other thing is, like, when you are breaking down the boundaries of geography, meaning, just decentralizing here, you've been able to get volunteer teachers from all over the world to participate in this.
Exactly.
Right. And so we're now not limited by sort of the physical locational number of people available to teach a course or something, but it's like anybody anywhere in the world can teach to anybody anywhere in the world. And that's actually, I think it's amazing.
And I mean, I credit my colleague, Chris Peach, who led this program and shared some of the data about the co-teacher experience. Their completion rates were, I think, 99% of the teachers who started finished teaching this course. Their, net promoter scores were through the roof. They had an amazing educational experience as well. And sometimes teaching is one of the best ways of learning. I actually took the course myself just to experience it. And my own teacher was an engineer at Apple who, taught himself Python in order to do this program. He doesn't work in Python in his day-to-day job, but he did it. And one thing he said was that his own son saw him teaching this course and started getting interested in programming because he saw his dad co-teaching this Stanford course. He was himself a Stanford alum, and it was a way of reconnecting with the university. But like, I think teaching and learning and scaling up those models in which we can build learning communities has so much potential.
Yeah. I really wish I had known about this, because I would have loved my kids who are in high school to be able to do this as well.
Well, there's more coming along those lines. It may not be the same, pandemic response, but that idea is now out there and it's been published, and we're going to do more projects like that. And I think there's so much potential.
Awesome. When anybody who's listening from in the world of education and academics or ed tech should check out Code in Place. Just search on Google, you get there. Phenomenal initiative. I think that's the kind of innovation I think the world needs to create true scale in access. So that's great. When turning to sort of this idea around enabling the future of work, what's an example of the educator learner journey in that ideal world where it is truly equitable and accessible educational system, right?
Yeah, so here's a remarkable fact. Half of the 5-year-olds living today will live to be 100 years old. That comes from a new report from the Center on Longevity at Stanford called The New Map of Life. And it has an excellent chapter written by my colleague and friend, Professor Mitchell Stevens here at Stanford, about the ways the education and work systems need to adapt, to change, to meet those needs of people who are going to, work for so much longer. So just, think about, does it make sense to front load so much of our education into what is basically just the first fifth of your life if you're going to live 100 years? And like, just even framing it that way, I think reveals the absurdity of the way we've front loaded learning in life. And so there's going to be a lifelong learning system that's clearly needed. But to me, the question is, like, can we do it in a way that is equitable? Can we do it in a way that it doesn't just benefit those who've already had privilege in those first 20 years and then get to do more and more of it?
Right.
And the educationally rich just get more richer over time. But can we do it in an inclusive way that becomes a system of second chances? So maybe you tried one thing and it didn't work out, and we've designed, the mechanisms for you to make changes over your life course. And so to me, we've got a project at Stanford that I'm quite excited about that's focused on our own working learners in our own backyard. And we've defined that as our staff who don't have post-secondary credentials. And what we're doing is designing like a set of learning opportunities and experiences that will give them opportunities to grow and to expand their skills and to take on more responsibility, and to use that as kind of a test bed for ideas that might then have implications in the Bay Area and nationally and globally. So that's our first effort in this space. It's funded by the National Science Foundation. It has a whole applied science and research aspect to it too, which
Yeah.
your audience can check out too. So to me, like figuring out this question is a generational challenge for ed tech, for institutions, for providers, for educators. And it's one thing that is really fundamentally changed from the way we have to think today, from the way compared to the way education was provided before.
Yeah, this leads to another point for me. I think that's great. But also thinking about, the learning has to happen at work, and it has to happen all the time. And then I look at the great resignation movement. People are frustrated with the jobs on one side, and then there are jobs that do not have enough supply of talented individuals to fill those jobs emerging in the digital space, right? About 150 million digital jobs expected to emerge over the course of the next 3 years. Yeah. So there's a question around like, so the way we are, at least at Coursera, has been imagining this is sort of through these job aligned professional certificates. And, a lot of it is related to entry level careers. We call them as great gateway professional certificates, like a Google IT support professional certificate, Google UX design certificate, etc. And there are a number of companies, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, Meta, they're all involved in creating these certificates to teach these populations of learners this alternate pathway to kind of get into digital jobs. And I think that's exciting for me. You quoted an example last time we were talking about, which was very interesting, providing sort of access to apprenticeships. Could you elaborate on that company a little bit more, or that idea?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think, apprenticeships are a proven model that are a much bigger part of the education system in Germany and Switzerland and Austria, the German-speaking lands, and have been underinvested in the US. They basically are only used in the skilled trades. But I think, there are many careers that are configured similarly to the skilled trades, and technology is one of them. We haven't put it in that bucket in higher education, but I think it could greatly benefit from that. So there's an emerging industry that is, partly taking these models from countries where apprenticeships are the norm and bringing them to the US and to other countries as well. So, and you can think about kind of a continuum in which a full-on apprenticeship is the most heavyweight, most significant thing you could do. And so, Year Up, which is a Stanford partner, we use it to staff our own, IT roles, and it's been really successful and is growing here. Multiverse is another player in this space, comes out of the UK, but is expanding in the US. But then there's also, more micro internship models where you can sample what it's like to actually do the job on a much more smaller scale. Yes. And I think that has a lot of promise too. And there's companies like Ripen, which is bringing in kind of project-based real work into higher education. There's an ed tech company that one of my students is involved with called 100 Mentors, which is about connecting workers to students in schools and using a TikTok style short video mechanism to do that. So I think there's a lot of experimentation going on in this space, from the micro to the macro, and we'll see what is the return on that investment and where do you get impact. And that to me feels like a very fruitful area for innovation right now.
I totally agree. I've been advising a company called Intern Mart, started by one of the Stanford professors as well. Similar idea, connecting high schoolers with short-term intern opportunities as well. I also know from our own research, from the users, like, these what we call as career switchers or career starters, a lot of the challenge for them is like, where do I start? And the question is like, okay, which of these careers makes sense for me? How does it fit me? And then they're going into this idea around, well, what does it mean to actually be doing this job? Right. And so that micro internship idea, I think, has got a lot of promise and potential, because that's what we need, I think, both in high schools and after work. People are already in work, but trying to get into new careers, understand what these other careers actually mean, and have the confidence that they can do those jobs. Exactly. The motivation is the starting point. Then you can figure out what the skills are, but you need to demystify what that looks like for people first. That's right. Awesome. I would encourage the audience to put their questions in as well. As I think about the future, there's a lot of emerging technologies. You talk about Web3, VR, AR, blockchain. What's your take on that? How does that enable or not enable the equity and access in education?
So I think what higher ed needs most is like a research and development approach that allows us to explore the potential of new technologies without falling into the dual traps of technological utopianism on the one hand and inertia on the other hand. And I think it's very hard to steer the middle ground that is optimistic and hopeful and exploratory, but doesn't get caught up in either of those traps. So on my team, like we try to be open-minded and curious about the potential of these technologies. I recently toured a VR lab called the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab at Stanford. And I encourage the audience to check out the 1000 Cut Journey, which will be more fully launched this spring, it's a DEI experience that uses VR to put the learner in the shoes of somebody who's typically quite different from them and to spend some time at different points in their life from childhood to adulthood, experiencing what it's like to be African-American in the United States. And it is an incredible empathy building experience that uses the VR in a way that I think is very impactful and has a lot of potential. So I don't know the extent to which that will play out, the impact that will have, but I think it's really important to keep an open mind and to explore these technologies, without ideology, without too many preconceptions. It's very hard to maintain that kind of childlike curiosity into adulthood, but I think that is part of the responsibility of innovators in education.
That's awesome. We got about 4 minutes left here. So let me ask you this question. What are the pillars of an innovation mindset? Like, I mean, if I think about the 4 things you laid out earlier, and how does an organization encourage innovation across a diverse set of stakeholders?
So paradoxically, I think, for education in particular, starting with a deeper understanding of history is actually one of the keys to designing a better future. And to me, we sometimes confuse the unhealthy obsession with tradition and the past with the healthy search for historical lessons and ideas from the past that might actually inspire us and have relevance today. So like many pundits say, universities are not innovative or are anti-innovation, but if you actually study the history a little bit more closely, the truth is quite different. And so universities themselves are the products of this intense process of hybridization, of bringing ideas from the outside in, integrating them into the core and making them work. And online learning is a perfect example of that. It originated outside traditional higher ed, but through partners like Coursera has become really an essential part of what we do, even in traditional institutions. So to me, the innovation mindset is really about scanning the horizon for opportunities to hybridize ideas that may have emerged outside, sometimes really far outside, but have the potential to be integrated and brought into what we do and might actually improve what we do for the long term and make it relevant for learners today. So that open-mindedness and curiosity and horizon scanning mindset, that it's about straddling the internal world of your organization and the external world of the forces and the disruptions and the new innovations that are emerging from the community.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. For the last minute or so, what do you think some of the big ideas that are going to come up as become trending topics in education in the next few years?
So we have a new report at Stanford coming out soon that's focused on our lessons learned from the pandemic. And one big idea in this report is really about supporting whole students. I think that was truly critical. It emerged from the pandemic. I think it's in danger of being missed as we emerge from the pandemic. But to me, like the mental health and wellness issues, the academic stress issues, all of that needs to be considered in scope for what we're designing for. And we can't imagine that you live your life in one corner here, and then there's the academic part of what you do in the other corner. We really need to treat like human beings as whole individuals and design for their needs in a more holistic way. And that to me is like one of the humane lessons that technologists really need to integrate more thoroughly into the way they think about their jobs, their products, their services, whatever they do for learners.
Great, great. Any upcoming projects you'd like to share with your audience?
Thank you. Yes, we have a book talk series that might be relevant. It's called Academic Innovation for the Public Good. This is a Zoom-based discussion series with authors of recent books on education and innovation. And we've got, in fact, one event coming tonight. There are monthly talks, free and open to the public. And it's a way, if you're interested in these issues, it's a way of engaging with us and with our colleagues at 12 other universities that are co-sponsoring this series nationwide.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. This has been phenomenal. When I think about like how you laid out what the innovation, how innovation mindset needs to be developed and how organizations can actually think out of the box here. I loved kind of how you laid out what were some of the key barriers to equity and access in education, the 4 key barriers you laid out earlier: the digital divide, academic prep, financial access, and the networks and social community piece. I mean, I think there's a lot to take away for the audience. Hope you had a great time listening to this. So to our audience, thank you. To those of us who joined us either live or going to be later. This is part of an ongoing series where I'm joined by leaders across business, education, and government to explore topics at the intersection of learning, technology, and innovation. Follow Coursera and LinkedIn for updates on our next episode and the guest. Until then, I'm your host, Shravan Goli. Stay safe and see you all next time. Thank you.
Thank you.